Hello and welcome to Fathoms Deep, a Black Sails podcast. From Common Room Radio, I'm Liz Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
So today we're diving into episode 3, but before we get into it, we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've heard back from our listeners. In our time, we just launched yesterday, which was very exciting. Congratulations, Daphne.
Congratulations.
I wish we had a ship that we could break a bottle of champagne on.
I know,
I feel
for real.
like that would be fitting. Thought about just doing it to my house, but I'm like, why would I waste good champagne? It's not even a boat. This is not right. On the van, maybe. I don't know.
We'll have to do a virtual champagne bottle on Twitter for everyone.
That's the same, right?
Right. Well, and then we're not wasting any champagne, so
True enough. So who did we hear from? We've heard a little bit from our friend Chelsea on Twitter, right? Who wanted to talk to us a little bit about our pirate flag.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chelsea. I was always under the impression that the only flag that was called the Jolly Roger was the skull and crossbones, the one we know best, which was Jack Rackham's flag, and we talked about that. But what I didn't realize that really all of the variations of the black flag with skeletal parts were called Jolly Rogers. So thank you, Chelsea. We didn't know that, and now we're going to research that.
Historian, I ain't. Fan of the show, I am.
That's super cool. And then in addition to that, we got a tweet from Andrew, who brought up that with our discussion of Eleanor, that he felt like Eleanor and Flint were kind of on similar standing in the first episode. That both of them, seemed to have power, but didn't really have the power that they were pretending to have, and they had different ways of dealing with that.
And so I really was just kind of floored by that when I saw it on Twitter, because it's so obvious now that he's mentioned it that they both had this very informed authority, and yet neither of them were in a position at the moment to really back it. But I did not put them, just because I guess, like Captain Flint, that name meant something to me, just like it did to the pirates when they saw his banner flying. Like, I know the name of Captain Flint from Treasure Island. I don't know the name of Eleanor Guthrie. That doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, also because she's not actually a historical character.
Right, yeah. Precisely. Like, she's brand new.
Yeah, she's a Black Sails character, which is great. I mean, that's also really going to be an interesting thing to see who are the historical characters, who are the Treasure Island characters, and who are the Black Sails characters.
Right. So thank you, Chelsea and Andrew, for those excellent points. And we sure hope that we'll be hearing from more of you in the future, because that's really the whole fun of this, is just talking about this show that's not getting enough talk, in our opinion.
So I also want to thank our friend Janine from Twitter, who has put together a whole essay for us that we're going to discuss with her about images that resemble Baroque art in Black Sails, which is completely a field that neither of us has any background in, and we're just so excited about this. So we need to talk to her more about that, and we will share that with everyone, because it's amazing. I mean, this is one of the amazing parts of doing this, is that I'm hoping that people who know things that we don't know,
that are outside our sphere,
will bring the things that they understand that connect to Black Sails to us, because this show is so deliberate, and it's so clear that all of the choices they make are choices that they're making for the sake of the story. And so there's definitely stuff that we're missing. So please, everyone, anything we're missing, feel free to tell us. We love it.
Right. It's true. So with that, are we ready to jump into episode 3?
Absolutely. So I felt like the structure of this episode could be 3 parts. One would be the first one, the one that frames the episode, is Mrs. Barlow's house. We of course don't know her name in the beginning, but that was the first part. And then the second one is to talk about things that happen in Nassau, in town. And so that includes Eleanor's office and the fort. And that's where all the negotiations are happening.
Yes.
So that's a big part of this episode. There's a lot of negotiations. There's a lot of people getting other people to do what they want. And then the last one is the beach, which is actually also about interactions, but like a little bit more about discord. Like the beach is where we're seeing problems.
Mm-hmm. That's the main arc of this show. And I do love how this particular episode is bookended, how we start in Mrs. Barlow's house and we end in Mrs. Barlow's house. And so there's this, which is so strange, this very domestic piece of this show when everything has been so transitory. You know, you're on a boat, you're in the brothel, you're on a city street, you're on the beach. But to have this clearly a place that's a home, that's at the beginning and that's at the end, is really fascinating. And we'll talk some more about that when we talk about themes, I think.
Absolutely. And I was so excited when you brought that up because I was so aware of the contrast, but the fact that it's a frame is just really exciting.
I love framing devices. I notice them every time. I use them a lot as a writer, and they just work for me.
Prepare to board.
Aye.
Okay, so let's move on to characters.
All right, terrific. Well, I wanted to actually start with Mrs. Barlow since that is really the beginning of our episode. The first thing I wanted to talk about was partnership and contrast with her and Flint. We've come into, as you said, we've had up until this point this kind of rough world of pirates, and then suddenly we're in a home.
And a lovely home. I love that when he wakes up, he sees that gorgeous, the white and blue pitcher and the bowl and clean soap. And it's just so different and he's still, grimy and bloody. And
I know. What does she say? She says, "You're bleeding all over my floor."
Yes, you're dripping blood on my floors. Yeah.
That's what she says.
Well, and he goes in and opens the little canister and smells it. Do you suppose that's tea?
Is that what you think?
Was my guess.
That's a good guess.
He sighed so deeply, and it was this idea that, okay, like this thing is providing comfort to me, and so tea seemed the most logical choice. That's how I feel about my coffee beans in the morning. So if I'd been without coffee for months, I would also have a deep sigh when I first smelled it again. So that's my guess.
No, I totally love that. I felt that it's such a obvious moment when he sniffs that, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and I love that idea. That makes so much sense that he's smelling the smells of domesticity.
But yes, it's something domestic, whatever it is, certainly.
Right.
Yeah. And she's in front of that great hearth.
I know. Oh, isn't that amazing?
Amazing. This fireplace that takes up the entire half of that room. Big, bright, open, and airy space. So still clearly Nassau, it's not polished at all.
Right.
But it is feminine in its way and domestic. And she is feminine and domestic in her way. I love that as they begin to interact, she is tending his wounds. But there's a remarkable lack of gentleness and like romantic affection with one another.
Right.
Like it seems like this would be a moment where she was very tender with him and where he was, where he would reach out and touch her face or something. It's been a long time. But there's none of that. So I'm like, is this a sister? Are we related? Is this, like a neighborhood friend that you've always grown up? Like, what is this backstory here?
Right.
Because they have this. When he first came in the door in episode 1, she says, "What? Take off your boots and I'll boil some water." And it's a very wife thing to say. But in this moment, they don't feel like a married couple. What is your thought about this exchange?
Well, right. It's very unclear what their actual relationship is to each other. The thing beyond the mystery that really strikes me is just the level of familiarity. It's so obvious that she knows his stuff and he knows her stuff. Like he makes a joke about the person who used to be spying on her, and now and she tells them that person died and there's a new one.
Yes.
Like they know each other's stuff. Like all he has to say to her is, "I found it." Mm-hmm. And she knows what he's talking about. They are so connected to each other, but you don't know at all the nature of the connection, but it's so familiar. Mm-hmm. So all I can think of is partnership, which could cover so many different things.
That's an excellent word for the two of them, especially in this episode, a partnership. Mm-hmm.
That's the feeling. That's just the general feeling I get that it is. And you're right. She's not like tender with him exactly, which I don't know. With Flint at this point makes a lot of sense. So like she seems so much like his equal. That's so clear in the way they're talking. The way they're interacting is that they see each other as equals.
Uh-huh.
They know each other's stuff. Like, they don't have to explain anything. They completely know what's going on in each other's lives. But you just don't know what the actual connection is.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And I love that. The next thing that really struck me about her, I'm going to call her now because we don't know
she's
her name
only
yet.
her, this woman in this house.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Is that she has 3 real interactions in this episode with men, and in each case, the interaction centers around a book.
That's fascinating. I didn't notice that. Like, I know it, and as soon as you say it, of course I know it, but I didn't notice. But you're absolutely right. We start out, and actually, Flint has a book for her, right? That he has taken as a prize, Middleton, and hands it to her.
Right. So yes, the first interaction is he's giving her a book, and it was, it felt like an appeasement. I mean, she's clearly not a happy person.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing I guess we could have talked about in the very beginning is like their interest. She's not happy. She doesn't smile.
There's not a lot of joy and delight in this household.
No, she's not happy. She just, even when he expects her to be happy about his joy at finding the schedule, she doesn't seem happy. He asks her about that.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if it was right before or right after he gives her the book, she said, "Oh, well, I was hoping to have you to myself longer." Yeah.
And which he immediately was like, "Oh, sorry about that. Brought Richard Guthrie with a good gunshot in his chest with me. Hope that's cool."
Right. But first I brought you a book, and we already knew that Flint had this relationship with books, and so he brings her a book, and I guess it's true. She doesn't seem terribly happy, although I do feel like that was something, that was from a place of understanding. The fact that he brought her that book.
You're right. It seemed to be something shared between them. Like, he had an assumption that, of course, she would want this book. So even if she doesn't seem like she does at this time, we still believe him that on some level this is a kinship that they have and something that they share.
Right. And you can imagine that, if she does like books, that's actually a pretty big gift. Because she's not living in a world where there's bookstores everywhere.
That's a really good point. Absolutely. That's a big deal.
She's living in the interior. I mean, he had to ride a horse there. She's living in the interior of this island. So I'm sure she doesn't have access to a lot of entertainment.
No. And we get the sense that she's very isolated because he has said about the spy. She said, they posted a new one. Right. And she says that Pastor Lambrick is the one who has put the spies there, but we don't have any idea why. The way that she says it implies that he is worried about her somehow. Pastor Lambrick is worried about her, and that's why the spies are there, to be certain that nothing happens to her. But there's also this idea that she is an outsider, that she is isolated on this island, that she is on the interior, and that the only person that she has is Flint.
And that's why she wanted him for longer.
Happy again, like she's relieved to see him walk through the door. She doesn't seem delighted to see him walk through the door. So it's a very interesting relationship.
Right. So we're going to get to the next interaction she has, which involves another book. Mm-hmm. I'm going to defer to you on this one.
Well, and I'll tell you what, this is a very difficult scene for me to understand and to parse through. And some of it is just my own biases because I'm from Oklahoma and I'm in the Bible Belt and I'm a Christian. And when I see a pastor figure come on TV, immediately I'm like, what idiot follower, sheep, Nancy Pansy, I'm like, there's always this stereotype that they give. And so my hackles get up as soon as I see one, especially when it's this kind of casting where he's obviously just a little bit lanky and derpy and, he's no Captain Flint, right? Right. So I'm just afraid that they're going to throw like a Mr. Collins, Pride and Prejudice style at me every single time. And I'm just tired of that. My favorite, actually.
Well, I'm tired. I'm tired of Mr. Collins too.
Right. I mean, I get tropes are what they are for a reason, and sure, we get these stereotypes, and I mean, I see why they come up so that we recognize them. As audience members, we know what to expect from this person now. But I was immediately just like, what are we going to do now? How are we going to make this person an idiot and a fool? So I have to be really careful personally when these scenes happen to shut down all of those biases and let the storyteller tell me what is happening here. And sometimes, actually, I should mention, I was thinking about this earlier today, that the time I thought it was done the best was in The Tudors. Did you ever watch The Tudors?
I did.
Sir Thomas More was wonderful.
Well, right.
Was wonderful. And I mean, I come from, my husband was a pastor when we got married.
He's a problematic person in history.
Yes.
But he was a great character.
Right. Yeah. Great character in the show, I suppose, and just portrayed in a really three-dimensional sort of way. Like he was a real human person, and I really appreciated that. So I just wasn't sure what to do with the scene when they first sit down, and I'm still not sure, to be honest. Now, I try to wipe clean my own slate and get rid of all of my biases and just watch this thing for what it is. But it appears to me, as she's sitting down here and she's got her little lace hat on and she's making tea, that she is flirting with him, right? Like from the very beginning when he walks up. He's, oh, I see that you're going to have company. I'm sorry. She's like, no, I look forward to our conversations. I've set a tea for you. Come and sit down. And it might just be her personality that she just kind of exudes that sort of
I think they leave it extremely unclear. I think that is definitely, I believe that the first time I watched it, I felt possibly that way too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the aspect of their interaction that's most interesting to me. But yes, there definitely are elements of that. She's a hard one to read, but I don't feel like her being hard to read is the function of questionable acting at this point. I feel like in her case, it's completely deliberate.
Yes.
As the story, not necessarily she's being deliberate about being hard to read, although maybe she is. But I feel like the story is deliberately putting us in a place where we will talk about that in our themes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the part of their interaction that I found so interesting is their different ideas about what God is saying to people.
Mm-hmm.
And what God wants from us. I just found that very, very fascinating. And I don't know, maybe that is that being like, do you feel like that's being very like Hollywood stereotypical about it?
No. It was hard for me to necessarily follow. So why don't you walk us through how the conversation happens? And yeah.
Well, as you know, for me, I felt like this went back to what one of the themes in the first episode is this question of shame.
Yes.
So he was definitely about to do it was the sermon for Easter, right?
Right.
It was Easter that he was so and also I wanted to point out that they made it very clear in their interaction that he brings his sermons to her to read.
Yes.
So she said, "Is that this week's sermon?" And that's
part of their conversation. Yeah, and he always says, "I love to hear your thoughts. I always appreciate your insights." Uh-huh.
So that's an interesting thing. Like he's got people spying on her. And he's also bringing her his sermons to read. So obviously he respects her.
He respects her.
He does respect her. And then, right. So she starts reading his sermon, and it was definitely coming from a place, which I guess at some point someone says they were Puritans. Like, so I guess that makes sense with our ideas of Puritans,
I've always wondered. Okay.
I think that might be in a later episode. So I might have brought up a word used in a later episode.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know. It's fun. I don't know a whole lot about Puritans, but something we associate with them is this kind of like religion
puritanical
equals right. Exactly. This kind of religion equals shame approach, and I just love how that what she flipped it on his ear. Like he said, well, of course, we're talking about. I can find his words. No, I didn't write them down.
Yeah, he said love in its purest form is love from suffering. Yeah, which I think, and it's hard to talk about like on Easter Sunday, you're supposed to be getting to the resurrection, but you have to start at the crucifixion, of course, which is this idea of someone taking your blame upon themselves, which means you have to acknowledge that you have blame of your own, I guess. So that's always how, like, you have to start there if you're going to get to the end, right? So it seemed a very natural place to start this. And so it was interesting that she didn't read any further than this, was just immediately like, do you believe this? And he says this thing, well, it's not to believe or be disbelieved. It's the gospel truth. Like, this is how it happened. This is how it's explained to us. So,
well, no, he said these are God's words. And that's when she turns it around on him.
Yeah, yeah. Which is interesting because they weren't God. Like, she uses scripture. Like, she's actually reading scripture. It was his
exactly.
words. You know what I mean? Like, that's his.
That's true. I guess he was
interpretation
he was quoting. He was quoting God loosely. He was paraphrasing.
Yes, he was paraphrasing God. This is God's paraphrase. Well, that's great.
No, but it was really interesting then that she kind of schools him on it, and he's a pastor, and she's schooling him.
Yeah, well, she goes back to Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, which is always a text that has caused some confusion and discrepancy within the church. So I know that in the time that in the time that it was written, even when the boys going to school who were studying like the Talmud were not allowed to read that particular section until they were until they'd been bar mitzvahed, until they were like 14 or whatever it was. Like, you don't even get to read that book yet because it's a little bit grown up for you. And it is. It's 100% about sex. I mean, to the point where it's like obvious that they're talking about oral pleasure. And you're like, oh, that's okay. Well, that's right in there. And she's absolutely right. God wrote that too. Like, there's not supposed to be a separation between the pleasure and the passion that is found in loving a person and the purity that is found in being loved of God and loving God. So the fusion of those things is really important, absolutely, and even for the themes of this kind of show. But to stack them against each other, I think, is also missing the point.
So do you feel like she was going down that road as a philosophical conversation, or possibly going back to your idea that she was flirting, or some combination of the two at the same time?
I think that she was trying to get him to question where he was finding his interpretations. If he was just parroting back and repeating what had been taught to him in his, Sunday school classes or whatever it was, or if he had given his own original thought and read through this book. It is a book, even the word Bible means book. And if he had read through it himself and allowed it to move him on a personal human level and not as a pastor and a preacher.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, definitely, again, this really goes to one of our main themes of the show that we started in episode 1. I mean, this is attached to this idea of civilization and shame.
Absolutely it is. Yeah.
So in my eyes, we are definitely, I mean, it would be obvious, even without seeing the scene, it would be obvious to say that the pastor would represent civilization, right? The kind of, the larger society that puts rules down.
Yes. Because he's the one that mentioned that the Scarborough has come, right? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, so he does. So then that's another thing. So he's definitely representing civilization. She, we're not sure yet. Like, she represents domesticity. Where is she representing? In this conversation,
it seems like individualism is the more important thing. Because he keeps on using these words like my flock and the righteous. And she says words like me and God, does that make sense at all? Like, because he says the Scarborough is here and we're going to come back under England's rule, or there's talk that we will come back over England's rule. And anyone who is in my flock will be unquestioned as to whether or not they are righteous. And she says, with a pretty heavy heart, it seems, it's not that easy for me. So and I love that about this character, is that you see in that moment that she is not going to let some other person tell her whether or not she is righteous. Like, she's struggling to figure this out for herself. So I like that part of the conversation quite a lot, actually. And
that's where he asks if Flint is keeping her.
Right.
Is that what he says?
Yeah, he says, is he keeping you here?
Is he keeping you here? Right.
And she just goes quiet and she clears the dishes and she says...
And
good day,
she's done
Pastor.
then.
I'm done now. Yeah. But then you see her go back in the house and she kind of leans over for a second. She takes that quiet moment.
Know.
She takes off the lace bonnet.
Yep.
And that's
Which is kind of...
anytime somebody takes off a piece of clothing in the show, it's important. So
it's just like Flint taking off his mask.
It's exactly like Flint taking
so
off his
reminds
mask.
that.
It's very reminiscent of that. And it had to be purposeful. So when she has a moment to reflect, we don't get any idea of an answer about what she's thinking about. If it has to do with the words that Lambert said, if it's about whether or not Flint is actually keeping her.
Yep.
And then immediately Guthrie said something and she's back out of the shot again. She doesn't even get time to sit there and question that. Although I imagine that, she gets lots of time alone in which she can. Yeah.
I think she gets a lot of time alone to think about whatever.
Right.
We don't know what her situation is, but she has a lot of time to ponder it.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's a great scene, and it still confuses me a little bit. I want to just look at it on its own. I don't want to be informed by future episodes. So on its own, that is what I take from it, is that she is approaching her faith from a very personal and inward place, and he seems to be projecting his from an authoritative place. Right.
So, and then the last person that she has interactions with for real in this episode is Richard Guthrie.
Yeah.
So we have one really important plot moment when she's talking to the pastor. Richard Guthrie sneaks out of bed and goes and is snooping around the house and sees a portrait of her.
Mm-hmm.
And it says Lord and Lady Hamilton.
That's what it says. Uh-huh.
And there is no question that is a portrait of her.
Yes. And a portrait of not Flint. Yes.
It's true. And definitely a portrait of not Flint.
Yes.
Yeah, yep. So we don't know what to make of that, but that, but it's
significant.
Even without
Whatever
knowing
it is,
things
we know
about
it's
the future.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's no way you don't know that that's significant when you see it. But then the other thing about Richard Guthrie is that in addition to bringing him food, she brings him a book.
Yes.
And I would like to discuss the book later, but just bringing up the fact that she does bring him Marcus Aurelius
mm-hmm.
and says that she thinks he will find it helpful.
Helpful. Yep. And then perhaps we can talk about it after, she says.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, and you and I can talk about it after when we get to the themes.
And she says it with not a little bit of arrogance.
Oh, I think we could say throughout she has a bit of arrogance in all three interactions.
In all three interactions. You're absolutely right. This is a woman who knows her own mind. Yes.
Right. Again, I think, I just feel like the thing that just struck me the first time is that she's schooling the men.
Yeah.
But and she's, very
whether
obviously
they're having
doing
it or not.
Right, exactly. She's very obviously doing it with the pastor and with Richard Guthrie.
Mm-hmm.
With Flint, it's a little bit more subtle because she does obviously see him as an equal.
Yes.
So that's, I feel like that's what we need to talk about in the first part.
Yeah, I think that covers her pretty well.
Right. So we can now, since we got to the later part of the show, we can now call her Mrs. Barlow.
That's right. Because by then we know Mrs. Barlow. Okay.
25 minutes in.
Before we get a name.
Before we get her name. All right. So we will talk about her a little bit more when we're talking about themes.
Mm-hmm.
So next, let's talk about Silver and Billy.
All right. I love Billy Bones. He makes me really happy.
I know you do. It's really hard not to love Billy Bones, but yeah, he's definitely. I'll take the Silver camp on this because Silver does intrigue me.
He is intriguing. Yeah, that's totally fair. Very true.
But I love Billy.
There's nothing intriguing about Billy. Billy, but you get what you get with Billy. But I like that about him.
I disagree with you. I find Billy intriguing.
Oh, really?
Because, as we said, because he is the audience surrogate. I find Billy intriguing because I feel like they're using him to inform how we're supposed to feel about stuff. So he's not a mystery.
Right. And I guess that's what I mean to say. It's like he's not mysterious at all. Which
no.
is kind of lets you relax a little bit because you're trying to figure out so many people. But with Billy, you get what you get. Right. And I like that.
Right. And that is kind of what I wanted to talk about was, the main thing with Silver and Billy is, the plan. So, we start actually with both of them together in Eleanor's office, and Silver's writing out the schedule that he had memorized, and everyone's really annoyed with him. And
That's
he
putting
does
it delicately,
not,
I think, yes.
yeah. And he does not write all of it.
No.
And Flint calls him on it immediately. And I love this interaction. I love this scene in general. I may have to quote Silver if you're okay
right
with
ahead.
that.
Yeah, no, I think that's good because he chooses his words very carefully. And he's quite funny in this scene, too, because he's very funny. Yeah, yeah. He shouldn't have a leg to stand on. But
and yet he still has two.
And yeah. And here he is. Yep.
So I love it. So he starts writing it, and Flint points out that it's not the full schedule that he needed, and he asks him why, and Flint says, "You all seem rather angry with me." And I just love that. And he says, if I wrote the whole thing, what would keep you from killing me this minute? And so he has his proposal that he becomes part of the crew and stays with them and gives them the last part of the schedule later on when they need it. And Flint says, what would keep me from killing you then? And Silver says, this is one of my all-time favorite Silver lines. He says, well, that's a few weeks from now. Isn't it? We might be friends by then, which is just the most hilarious idea right then, because they are all glaring at him. They hate him so much right now.
Yeah. Definitely the person we most want dead. We might be friends by then. But, I wouldn't put it past you, Silver. I really wouldn't.
Well, exactly. I just really, really love that. Again, I love it when Silver's being smart, and he's being really smart here.
Mm-hmm. He sure is. Yeah.
I kind of love it when he makes people angry.
He does both of those things pretty often, so I think you're in good hands.
Exactly. I'm bound to love him. But then we have this whole thing of Silver trying to make himself useful. So, Billy's upset because he wants to know. He's very worried about what he just did, about this lie that he told Flint.
Yeah, he's really struggling with that still.
Yeah, he really is. And he's very concerned about getting caught on a much more practical level. I found it was just an interesting juxtaposition of the way that Billy's trying to, he says, we canvass. We're just going to ask people, who still hates Flint, basically. And Gates is like, yeah, that's not going to work. You're going to exactly make people suspicious doing that. But it's Silver who actually finds out. So he's through kind of sneaky ways of pretending he himself is dissatisfied.
Exactly.
He's the one that flushes out the people who are still dissatisfied.
Through Randall.
So I just felt like that was...
And through Randall, who again you've said is one to watch. Yes.
Yeah.
Very
so
interesting
talk a little bit about
Randall was the one who spilled the beans on Go Talk to Turk and Morley. Yeah.
Right. So Randall, I love that interaction when Billy brings Silver to Randall and says, if he tries to run, scream.
Yeah.
And then before Billy even walks away, Randall screams. And again, this goes to my idea, is Randall really not all there?
Yeah.
Or is Randall trying to convince everyone he's not all there?
Is he just playing that card? Yeah. It's
a
great question.
It is not clear.
It's not clear.
Right. And
you're absolutely right.
It is not clear. And then it goes to the conversation with him and Silver. You would be led to believe that Silver kind of was sneaky and got this information out of Randall. But was he?
Yeah.
Maybe it was Randall who wanted to tell Silver in the first place.
Information. Yeah.
Right. So it's really not clear. Again, I know for people who haven't watched the show, you're what are you all talking about? Of course it's clear. And so we are a little bit spoiling Randall stuff, but I'm okay with that myself. I just want everyone to keep watching Randall. Watch Randall.
Yeah.
Everyone watch Randall.
He's very interesting.
Because later on we'll see stuff that makes you think back at these moments and wonder what was going on in Randall's head and how much he knew or didn't know.
Right. Well, and I love that as soon as Silver gets the information, he knows that the person to go to is Billy Bones. And he says to him, I want to live, and earning your trust seemed like a good start toward that end. And he's absolutely right. Billy is the guy, because you were right. You said in our first episode that Billy is loved as well as respected by the crew. Like, he's liked by everybody. And he's the guy. If Billy is on your side, then you've got Gates on your side, and then the crew is yours. You've got him. So Silver goes exactly to the right person. Which, again, just shows how great he is at reading people.
But there is that great moment when Silver's showing Billy the mutineers.
Yes, and Billy's like, tell me something I don't know.
Right.
Billy's like, I know everything that happens on this ship. He's like, let me tell you what Turk said about Flint. And Billy's like, Turk thinks Flint is undead, walks the earth without a soul. He believes there's a witch that lives deep inside the island who controls his every move. Like, he's like, that's more or less it. Yeah, that's pretty much what he said. Which is also great, because that's this other kind of hint of this whole thing, the who is Mrs. Barlow, this witch who lives inside the island who controls his soul. So whoever this person is, she obviously does have some kind of connection to Captain Flint.
Absolutely. But the thing I love the most is when Silver takes it a step too far. Like, when he's showing them and he's talking to them, he puts his hand on Billy's shoulder, and Billy just shakes him off. He's like, "Dude, we're not friends yet."
Yes. Oh, it's pretty funny. Yeah, it's good.
I just love that. Like, Silver, he's trying so hard to be charming, and I mean, charming's not working for him.
No,
devious is working for him pretty well. Charming, not really. He's not charming, these guys. No. I don't know who he was hanging out with before he was hanging out with pirates.
But they were a simpler bunch.
Exactly. Even Billy, who's like the least devious of all of them, is not falling for his stuff so much.
But Billy is not a dummy. I mean, just because he's straightforward.
No.
And he calls it like he sees it, that's one thing. But he's no dummy at all. We see how smart Billy is later on when he's talking to Morley, because that's the first time that he really just like stands by his lie.
Oh, right.
And he really has, and he takes advantage of the crew's trust in him in that time. And that's not something that you would expect from our Billy, but it does show that he is a smart guy, and he's not one that is to be easily fooled.
Although part of my heart always breaks every time I see him do that, because you can tell already. We haven't known him for very long, but you know that when he does that, just a little bit of his soul is cracking. That he just had never did that before, but he does it well when he needs to, clearly. Mm-hmm. But it's so hard for me to watch, because he just was not a liar before this.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. Now my heart broke a little bit.
I know. Sorry.
First I was just impressed by him, but now you're right.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I must have everyone else's heart break with my heart.
So who do we have next?
All right, next let's talk about Eleanor. Eleanor has a lot of different interactions with different people, so I feel like we should go through them.
Yeah.
I thought we'll start with Eleanor and Scott, which is also Eleanor and Flint, but we'll talk about Eleanor and Scott.
First, I have a really important question. In this scene with Scott, is she recycling booze? Because that's gross, right?
Oh my God! I did. I took a note of that
when I watched it today. And then pouring it into a pitcher. She's like, "Yep, this is rum. Serve this tomorrow."
She is totally doing that. I've noticed it every single time, and only this time did I actually write it down in my notes. And yes, that is hilarious. But also, part of me this time that I watched it today, right before we're talking, I was like, is this kind of showing, like, maybe this is what she should have been? Like, she should have just been a person who runs a saloon and not the person running an island.
Yeah,
like,
respect here. Yeah, I'm like, okay, this is where she knows what she's doing. And this is the first time I've seen her and I've actually believed that she knew what she was doing.
Exactly. It so struck me this time. I mean, I've seen this scene so many times, and I was always paying attention to her conversation with Scott.
Yeah. But and Scott, again, is talking to her like she's the little kid, like she's the daughter, and he's got to, like, steer her in the right way. And even her responses are kind of like, she's always been that, well, Daddy
petulant.
Here, and Izzy. Yeah, and she's a little bit petulant in the scene, but her actions are, she's almost not even thinking about it, because this is something that she understands and that she does well. Yeah.
Right. So this is what they're discussing are these guns that Flint has asked for. I mean, he gave a shopping list.
Yes.
Like she basically said,
Big shopping
you can
list.
have whatever you want. Before he gave her the shopping list, he gave her the shopping list, and she's like, yes, you can have it. But when he says he needs those guns,
Yeah.
Scott makes a face, and when she says you can have them, she's kind of looking at Scott.
Yeah, like, I don't know how we're
Like,
going to do this,
is-
but we're going to have to make this happen. Yeah.
Well, and she's just saying, you don't get a say in this. Like I'm committing to this, and then right. So then while she's pouring off I think it is old. It's gross.
Yeah, that's what that is. It's
The
got to
old
be.
booze. Right.
Yep.
So when she's doing that, they're talking like Scott's basically being doom and gloom and just saying we have no stock, no storage, we'll be out of money soon. And then the thing that struck me that goes back to stuff we talked about with her is she said, well, once we run out of money, my dad's going to have to come help us. And I was just like, really? Really? She thinks this is crazy. It's crazy for her to think that. And it's like, we don't know her or Richard very well yet. Mm-hmm. And even with the little that we know, it's pretty obvious that that's not actually going to happen.
It seems pretty unlikely. Yeah. It doesn't seem like they have a real great father-daughter relationship at this point. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, this just goes back to what I was saying before about her. I just feel like she's very unrealistic about where the power lies, what the relationship of her to the people who actually have power. Yeah.
She does not understand her place yet when we see her in this scene.
No.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this just goes back to what I said, that she acts like a person with power, but she doesn't really have it, but she kind of does, but she kind of doesn't, and she just doesn't know what to do it. She just doesn't know how to be a powerful person.
Yes. Yeah. Beautifully put. I think you're right.
And then we have the lovely interaction with her and her father.
Oh, yeah.
At Mrs. Barlow's house, which was so uncomfortable for me.
Walk me through that. So, I don't have any notes on that, but I remember it.
Right. So, he's wounded, so that's why he's there. But so in the beginning, she's, kind of soothing him and, are you comfortable, you this? And then the minute he does not, she tells him the plan.
Yeah.
She needs the guns. And the minute he does not agree, she just flips, and then she's just insulting him.
Yeah.
She's threatening him. She's insulting him. And again, just loose cannon behavior.
Yes, loose cannon. Ooh, Eleanor Guthrie, loose cannon. I like it. Mm-hmm. Wow, that is so accurate. And it's perfect because it's pirate terminology. I like it. Or at least ships.
Well, and we will see that. I mean, we'll get to that part, but she's going to have another moment where she, again, she doesn't make good choices. No. She's really just going in a million directions. Yeah. She is, I think I said flailing. She's flailing. She's flailing. Really,
yeah.
She's a flailing loose cannon. That is a terrifying idea.
I wish she was younger because her personality is so young. Like, if she was 19, I would buy every single thing that she was doing.
Wow. That is just really interesting. Right. Mm-hmm. If they had cast a younger actress. Right. We would buy her behavior more if she was more like a teenager, especially in those days when people became not what we think of as teenagers at an even younger age. Wow. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Okay, but not the reality.
But not what they did, so here we are.
Yep, no reason to dwell
on that.
Trying to
make sense of Eleanor Loose Cannon Guthrie.
Right. Well, and now we can discuss her next loose cannon thing.
Well,
which is
first we're up in the room, though, right? Where we're all talking about making the deal, basically, right? Is that where we go next? I really enjoy that whole scene. I love that there is an electric chemistry between her and Vane through that whole thing. Like, you can tell the first thing she says to Jack is, well, what'd you have to bribe him with to get him here, Yep. And then Jack, so smart, says, oh, this was his idea.
He's so smart. Yeah.
But it changes everything about the way that she sees him there. And he is absolutely right when he has that stellar line, like the quintessential Charles Vane line, when he says, be honest, are you as surprised as I am that I'm the only one here behaving myself?
Well, I certainly was, that's for sure.
And he was. He just sat there quietly in the corner, running a little gold coin over his thumbs, being Captain Cool. Just Captain Cool. Can I call him that? That's your new name, Charles Vane. So he's just being awesome in this whole meeting. And then
he's being amazing.
He has that great line at the end because, Jack is all like, well, I want to know who's going to be enforcing this because I don't trust Miss Guthrie because obviously she's got Flint's best interests at heart, not her own. And Flint,
which is a very good point.
It's a completely valid point, and everyone in that room knows it. But Charles Vane steps up and says, "Her word is good enough for me, and it's good enough for you." Stands up and shakes her hand, and then does that little lingering, like fingertip.
He does do that lingering thing, doesn't
out.
he?
I'm like, no, oh no.
Yeah, I think he made it pretty clear the whole time he was there that the only thing that was interesting to him was making her happy.
Yeah. And it was
he never says it.
Yeah.
He definitely plays tough guy vis-a-vis Flint.
Right?
But he's making it clear to Eleanor, like while being tough captain guy to everyone else, he's making it completely clear to Eleanor that he is 100% there to make her happy.
Yes. Which is so, like, I love Charles Vane. I've already said this, but Charles Vane is such a fascinating character because while he is, like, ruthless and bloodthirsty, and she has that comment, like, you run your ship like it's a bunch of animals. I don't like the way that you do things.
Right.
Which is absolutely accurate, you know, and he does murder people, you know, or sanction murder, however you want to look at it.
Right.
But in this scene, he has this sort of chivalry that is so interesting and unlikely. And frankly, it works for me a lot. Like, I'm not a bad boy type. That's not like the kind that necessarily gets me. But this is a very sexy scene, and I like it. And every time I like it.
Well, I'm also not a bad boy person, but I am a loyalty person, and
that's very interesting.
And that's what comes through to me with him, with her, is that he really loves her. He really, really loves her, and it's not always the prettiest love.
No, that's a good point.
But it's very intense and very directed and very true in its own kind of brutal, vain sort of way.
Yeah.
But it is so sincere.
It is. Sincere is a good word. Yeah.
So, right. There's just no way you can't be moved by that, even if he is not the person you would want that for yourself necessarily,
right,
but the sincerity, the intensity of it. There's just this like really solid core inside of him that is his love for Eleanor. And again, I know we're just going to every episode talk about Zach McGowan
because he's awesome. He's perfectly cast, spot on.
Because he's just sitting there looking at her, and you feel every bit of like this inside of him that is so madly in love with her and willing to do anything for her.
Yep.
And
good stuff.
He's not
and yet
saying
still
that.
A complete badass with these other guys around who are looking at him
right.
to keep his stuff together.
At the exact same moment. Yeah. It's incredible
it's really,
how he
really
manages to do so many things at one time while he's really just sitting there.
Yes. It's the word I always think of when I think of Zach McGowan's performance is nuanced. It's a very nuanced performance. It's incredibly well done. Yeah, absolutely. He steals that scene. And there's a lot of people in that room. Jack Rackham is in that room.
And there are a lot of... that's true. And Flint's in that room.
Yeah, Flint's in that room too. Yep. Now, granted, they're not having as much to do because they have, a very specific... They're just trying to get their goals met. He has a lot to do as an actor in that scene, but he's nailing it.
Right.
He's killing it.
Well, but he also manages to do it with, like, the least actual talking.
You're right.
He does the most in that scene.
Right.
When
I'm
really
trying to be fair to everybody, but no, Zach McGowan.
All he's doing is, all he did was like basically perch himself in the corner and like do all of this acting without much moving, even.
Yeah. Yep. It's really good stuff.
So then, I mean, we can talk about, how this turns out for him, this trusting of Eleanor Guthrie and
how'd this go for him, Daphne?
Everyone
Did it work
else.
Out?
No, that didn't work out for him so well.
Well, initially it worked perfectly because here he is reclined in bed, ready to just relax and chill for the night. And here comes somebody through the tent door and he goes for his pistol.
Okay, well, on that level, it did work out for him.
And here's Eleanor Guthrie, who says no words.
Okay, we need to talk.
Just starts to unbutton. And he's like, that worked then. Excellent. Okay, this is a very interesting scene because obviously there's a lot of sex in the show. And sometimes I'm left saying, why do we do this thing? Like, when we talked about with episode 1 with the 5 whores, we're like, why are we doing this? What is even the point? Yeah. And in this scene, it's very okay, I understand what the storytelling point of the scene is. You know, she comes in, she doesn't.
They're telling a lot of story in this scene.
Yes.
I still feel like after all of these viewings, I'm still trying to unravel what is going on emotionally here. Like, it's there, something's there, but I don't,
again, I can't read Eleanor at first. Like, she comes in and she's just undoing her bodice. I'm like, obviously you're here for one thing. All right, we understand that. But it does seem like one thing. It seems very single-minded. And after having seen what we just did in that room, like, I understand where there's just like a physiological response, if you will, to like, I get that for sure. But Vane is so relieved to see her, and again, like, the expression that was not on Mrs. Barlow's face when Flint walks in the door is absolutely on Charles Vane's face when Eleanor walks in the door. He's so relieved to have her back for a moment.
But he's also, he's pretty brutal. Like, it's not a tender love
starts
scene.
that. Well, the two of them are jockeying for position. Literally.
Yeah.
And that is what they do. That is what their relationship is, and it's why it doesn't work. So, and of course, because he's bigger and stronger in every way, basically. So, and you see her, like, pissed about that at first. Yeah. But then again, also just into him, and so willing to lay that down for a moment.
So you do think that she was moved. Like, that was the part that I feel like was always hard for me to understand. Like, is she literally just paying him off for conceding and doing what she wants? Or was she moved, and did she come to the tent because she was moved by his gesture?
Neither. I think.
Okay.
I think. This is my interpretation, and I really couldn't tell you because, again, I have a lot of trouble reading Eleanor Guthrie. But my interpretation is that she was just... pure and simple, was just turned on and was like, I like what you did in that room, and it made me miss you, so here's one more for old time's sake. And that's why she came in.
Fascinating.
But I don't think that I don't think that Vane thought that. I think Vane thought, we're going to get to start over. We're going to get to try this new. Because, again, he's so... Well, remember when she sits up...
So sad.
It is sad.
Right.
Because when she sits up, she's finished. Like, she starts to button back up again. She's getting ready to leave. He reaches back out to her. And that's when she does have that moment. That's the first time I see any tenderness expressed towards Vane is after he has stopped her and reached out to her when she's ready to leave.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that too. I've had such a hard time reading that scene. I like your interpretation very much.
Oh, good. I hope it's the one.
I'm there.
It's the only way I can make sense
taking
of
that
it.
on is it's always been a hard scene for me to understand. I mean, again, it's true. Eleanor is hard to read, and I like your reading. I'm there with you on that.
Cool.
But yes, this ultimately. So I guess that part, the short term, Vane's gesture towards her worked out.
Yes.
In the long term, Rackham was completely right. She is unreliable.
Unreliable is a good word. Loose cannon Guthrie.
She showed herself to be in, favoring Flint before, and she will go against her own agreements from her emotions. Again, loose cannon.
Yes.
I mean, again, she has grounds. I mean, she's not grounds to change the agreement, but I understand her anger
obviously.
when she hears that scream and finds Max being raped in the middle of the beach, surrounded by people. It's horrible, and she freaks out completely, understandably. But then there is that response. Exactly, Jack's biggest fear is that Eleanor will just change the agreement on, that they all came to. They worked so hard to get to this agreement, and she just broke it. And she handed Vane's ship and a portion of his crew to Flint.
Yeah. And I have to say, though, even though it is completely emotionally driven, it's a great moment for Eleanor in that it's the first time that she realizes how much power she really does have and that she actually wields it effectively. But it's also problematic because she is in a world where we have talked about democracy and tyrants. This is a moment of tyranny. It is absolute tyranny. You're absolutely right about that. It is tyranny. She knows that she holds all the cards in that moment. And when she says you won't buy anything, you won't sell anything, you won't eat anything. And she has the power to say that. And I think it's the first time she really noticed, like before when she was presenting herself, it was always just again, just being really flippant towards people and just, telling people off and just being this just loud, brass, clanging cymbal. It didn't mean anything. But this is the first time that you saw that she actually does have quite a bit of sway in this island.
And there's a moment where Vane tries to stop her. Like, she gets the guys off of Max, and she starts to say this, and Vane says, Eleanor. What does he say? I don't remember what he says exactly, but he very, very quietly tries to stop her. And I honestly believe in that moment that he's trying to stop her for her own sake, not for his. Like, he's going to be in a bad position because of this. But just the way he said it, I felt like he understands that what she's doing is dangerous.
It is.
To her.
Yeah.
It is. She's overstepping what her power not what her power should be, but what her role should be. She has the power to do it.
But she should never, ever do it. It's an abuse of her
power.
Yeah.
Right. It's an abuse of her power, and he knows that. Yeah. And I really believe that at that moment, he wants to stop her for her own sake.
That's very interesting. I never saw it like that. I think I just saw it as him realizing that if he didn't get to her now, he was never going to have her again. Like this was the moment that he was losing her. And if he could, he could reel her back just a little bit in this moment, if he could get them to reconcile right now, if he can get her to see whatever he thinks is reason right now. And also, I think that he was sincerely remorseful. He wanted Max gone.
Right.
He never intended for Max to be in this position.
Right. We did not. Yeah, we didn't discuss that. He tried. Okay, but what I find is interesting here is that I had one interpretation of him trying to stop her, and you had an interpretation of him trying to stop her. And both of those had to do with his relationship with her, not the fact that he was a captain about to lose his ship.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely not about the fact of his losing his captaincy.
But isn't that interesting? We just saw him kill people for the sake of power, and yet both of us really believe that in that moment he's motivated by his loyalty and love, not by his about to be losing power.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Well, it's what makes him such a compelling character, certainly. And he is a compelling character.
And I'm sure there are people who would interpret that moment completely 100% about him. And there is the moment when Anne Bonny tries to walk away and he says, if
you move, you die, basically, right?
Right, that's what he said. So that was about power.
But that's also about what you said, too, about loyalty. I think that
loyalty is
98% of his crew could have crossed that line and he would have shrugged his shoulders and walked off. But Anne Bonny and Jack Rackham owe him their loyalty in his eyes. Yeah.
We just talked about Eleanor's reaction to finding Max. It's really a very small part of the episode, but I feel like a very powerful one is the conversation that Vane and Max have. It's short, but it's got so much going on in it. Just, to remind everyone in the background is that Max, we find out after the whole big meeting with the negotiation and the deal struck about the ships, when they're walking away, Rackham tells Vane that he has something he needs to deal with, and they go to a shack and find Max there, beaten, naked, tied up, and Vane comes in and their conversation is really very chilling for me. It's hard for me to watch this conversation because he is the one that brought her there, and he makes that clear that she lost his crew a lot of money, and he needed to bring her there to pay them back. For her to pay back what she had lost them, and she did. That was, it's choice. I don't know. She was definitely in a bad position, and Eleanor had sold her out. So, but she did lose them a lot of money that they had paid her. But the part that is so striking is when he asks her. He said, "She was guarding you. You were safe. Why did you leave?" And she says, I did not write this down, but she says something like, "How did you feel when she cast you aside?" So this is really, again, we have a situation where these two actors are really so good, and it makes you so sad. part of me just, doesn't, it's just like, really, Eleanor? Like, is she really the person
Right.
that we're all going to
which I
suffer so
definitely
much
agree,
for?
especially with Max, because it's just, we have not seen it with Max at all. Like, we didn't see any real intimacy with Max besides that morning after scene, sort of. And
Right.
even then, it was
we
still...
saw the scene where she's trying to get Eleanor to leave with her, and for me, that was a very believable. I believe that
I believe
scene.
Max
I believe that
completely.
Max really went.
But again,
right.
with Eleanor, I'm just trying to understand. Like, it never seemed like a big mutual relationship. Whereas I absolutely believe that Eleanor and Vane have all of this backstory and all this water under the bridge. But it's hard to necessarily see it with Eleanor and Max. Like, I just have to take it because the writers gave it to me. So I just have to accept that, okay, these two have a thing, but I haven't seen it.
Right. But even if you didn't have the proof that exists, that you do believe that for Max in her own mind it does.
Certainly.
Which is just such a...
Certainly so.
It's a really just very terrifying thing to think putting yourself in that sort of position. The thing that I love, which again, now going back to Vane love, is I love that Rackham, when he said you need to take care of this, I think he makes it pretty clear that he thinks Vane needs to kill her.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Like, this girl needs to die. She cost us all this money. Yeah, clean up this mess. Mm-hmm.
Right, and she's going to be trouble for us now that we just made this arrangement with Eleanor. And then, when Vane walks out again after having that conversation, like, that conversation moved him. He relates to her. And so when he told Rackham to take her away at night, and Rackham's like, that was not what I meant by take care of this. And he was just, it's just,
but you
again,
see
this
that
is just
because
a moment.
he recognized that sameness, that similarity that they shared, that he had this desire to ease her pain. And that's amazing. It's so beautiful coming from this character that is so ruthless and cutthroat in so many other ways.
Is also very noble. And I just really think noble is a great word for him.
It's true.
We will see that he...
this is why he's a Gryffindor, by the way.
Yes, right. Sorry, everyone who's listening to the podcast does not follow us on Twitter. We did have this conversation a little bit about sorting the characters, which we can post somewhere or on Twitter.
Like you do. If there's a crossover, I'm a big Harry Potter fan. It all comes back down to your Hogwarts house, so... But absolutely, he has this kind of loyalty and this kind of chivalry.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, he's not... I mean, what I always love about all of the characters here is that so many of them have really wonderful qualities. So many of them, well, all of them pretty much have, in addition to that, qualities that are less attractive. But they make sense. They make sense
flawed.
The way people do.
Everyone in this program is just so flawed. And I love that. Yeah, I really do.
They're very, very human. They're very exaggerated humans.
Yeah,
but
is
they're
true.
So, but they're very believable humans.
But believable. Absolutely.
Okay, so I would love to get into one of my favorite interactions in this whole, well, possibly this whole season, but definitely this episode. I love it when Gates goes up to the fort and talks to Hornigold.
Oh yeah.
I just love this. I love the familiarity. I love the way they talk to each other. I love this moment of having these two older traditional pirates talking to each other.
Yeah, he's very old school. I
thought that was wonderful. Very old school, right. I think I wrote many times on my page, old school.
I think I have that too. I have old school written
down. So yeah, I just really love this. I mean, Gates goes up with a purpose, but there are some really interesting thematic things in their conversation because even though both of them are old school and they clearly relate to each other, and of course we have to bring up Hornigold's chair.
Yeah. Sir Francis Drake sat in this chair.
Yes, and I think that was a great moment of showing, that Hornigold is a traditionalist.
Yes.
This is, this is part of a tradition. I mean, of not just pirates, of privateers before pirates. And we discussed privateers were seamen who weren't exactly pirates, but they did pirate-like activities that were condoned by the government, used by the government in wars. They would have captains go out and take ships of the enemy country in a very pirate-like way, but again, completely in the framework of how they were having the war. They weren't soldiers. They weren't part of the Navy, but they were serving the government. So I love that connection. I love that he really is like just so like it's so important to him, this bit of kind of pirate tradition, even though he himself is part of the pirate tradition. He was a historical pirate. He was one of the main pirates of the Republic of Pirates in Nassau historically. Wow. And also he's a Jacobite.
Yes, I did notice that.
So this is a reference.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So this is a reference. When Gates asked him about back home in Scotland, he's talking about King James, who had just gone into exile because we don't need to go into the whole history of that.
But he has that line, they call him the Pretender now. Mm-hmm.
So Hornigold's crew, I think it's pretty clear from the conversation they're having, had left and become pirates because they were exiles, like the Stuart exile, when this power change has happened from the Stuarts to the Hanovers. Mm-hmm. And he makes fun of Gates. Like Gates uses, like he says, "You're sounding a whole lot like Flint now." When Flint, so there's this. It's showing this tension between the traditional pirates and kind of the dreamers. Like Flint is like portrayed as like this like kind of weird dreamer who has these big ideas of doing things like taking Spanish galleons. He says no one would ever have done that in the past. No one would have thought to do that. And then Gates says something like, some things you can't afford not to do. And that's when Hornigold says, "Oh, great, now you're sounding like him."
Like Flint. Yeah, and he has another great quote about Flint that I wrote down, too, that it's like, the man's arrogant and presumptuous. And I'm like, you know what? You're not wrong. You're not wrong,
right?
Hornigold.
You are not wrong at all. The last thing he says kind of breaks my heart, but is really, I think, tied to like how we can see, different state of mind of different pirates is he says when Gates says, basically he wanted to take Hornigold's ship and crew, but have Gates be the captain to do this, to go after the Urca de Lima with Flint. He says, "Well, your crew trusts me." And Hornigold says that he's not sure that his crew trusts him anymore, that they had this grand idea of being rebels and bringing the Stuarts back onto the throne. And then he says, "No matter how many stories we convince ourselves we are part of, we're all just thieves waiting for a noose."
That also really stuck out to me. And it was, you're right, it's heartbreaking, which is so interesting because, it's very true that, like we shouldn't be rooting for the pirates. But well done, writers. Here we are.
Right. Well, and he used the story word. Like the minute he used the story word, my ears perked up because
the stories we think
we're
part of.
So this is a bit of a rebuttal to this, to this idea of using stories for these grand ideas to change society, to make this new world that's outside of civilization. He's saying, you know what? That's a pipe dream.
Yeah.
Like this is not what Flint thinks it is. We're really just what everyone thinks we are. We're really just bad guys and they want to kill us, and this is our doom. Like this is what's going to happen to all of us. We're just biding our time. And that's a pretty sad statement.
It was. Yeah, it really was. And it brought you back down to the real world for a second. Yeah.
It did. And I think it's important. I mean, we don't tell epic stories about people who think that way.
That's a good point.
As charming as Hornigold is in this interaction with Gates, he's not going to be our hero. Right. There's no way. But it is a good glimpse into the fact that it's not just like Flint and his band of pirates versus civilization. There is a dissenting voice inside of Nassau as well.
And not only is there a dissenting voice inside of Nassau, but it's the one that holds the fort. Which is
Ready to guns! Full complement!
Let's talk about quartermasters and captains. And I love this as a theme. I mean, we've already talked a little bit about ship politics and the role of each one, but I feel like this episode gives us such great interactions of each set of quartermasters.
It really
and captains.
does. Yeah. To pretty great effect. I really love when we see Gates and Flint kind of arguing and bickering on that little balcony or the little breezeway, whatever it is.
Oh my goodness, it's the best.
It's a great
scene. I mean,
both of the quartermasters are
it
really awesome in this episode.
I know, they're so good. Yes, and that I mean, it's so interesting. That whole negotiation has such really emotional moments and such amazing comedy. I mean, truly comic
which
moments.
Is so
good.
More
comedy than we've had yet.
That balance is so important. And it would be hard to enjoy this show. I have heard before in listening to interviews with the writers that they started out and the producers told them, or rather stars told them, this feels a little bit too dark. Can you lighten it up a bit? And I'm really glad that they did that. You know, I really do think that had it been just all dark and heavy and grim, it would not be my show. But the fact that we get these moments where I can laugh out loud and where I can it's just the sun is shining, literally and figuratively. I really like that.
Well, yeah, and those are very human moments as well.
You're
and they're always
right.
like
That's a great point, Daphne. Yeah. It doesn't suck all the time, Daredevil.
Right. and I love that we're never laughing at our characters in a way that's disrespectful. And this is a great moment of it. Like we're experiencing humor through what is a totally, true feeling interaction between them. So we can set this up. Like the awesome thing, we have this negotiation, this big negotiation. Oh wait, before we talk about that, I just want to bring up one thing that is not a theme of the show, but is a thing that happens all the time. I think this might be our first "fuck you, Jack" that we get from Vane. It might be our second. I feel like I might have missed that in one of the other in the first two episodes. I don't remember, but this is a thing. I mean, this is a thing to the point where later on the show it becomes its own self-referential joke. What?
It starts that scene, doesn't it? Like when we first cut to Vane in the tent with the two girls on each arm. Yeah, and that's exactly how he starts it.
So that was the first, again, I apologize to our listeners if I missed one before this. This was the first one where I was like, right, must make note. This is a thing. Yes. He gets a lot of that. He gets it both from Vane and from Anne. And I just, and that is a character thing for Jack, that he just, he's just like, okay, you needed to say that. Great. Yes. Moving on.
Well, I love that line he has in this one, too. He's like, they need to yell for a little while. Makes them feel better about themselves. Completely just rolling off his back. Yeah. He's a smart character.
He is all business. He's going to make the things happen that he doesn't always succeed, but he's going to do his best to make the things happen. So we have this great meeting in Eleanor's office where we have the two captains doing their poses. Each of them has kind of a different agenda, but they're doing their poses. Vane with his lounging, with his coin moving around in his fingers in that way that I can't even imagine how he does that. And Flint being very broody and scowly and even a little petulant. I mean, he's doing that over on his side, and they're like outside. And then
that's right. Yeah.
He is a little petulant in this. And then at the table we have the quartermasters. So we have the two quartermasters, and they're doing the actual
negotiating the whole time. They're just looking for nods from their captains.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Right. They are totally the negotiators, but they can't do anything. So, so we should talk about just for a second how we got to this table. Like, remember that Gates was talking to Hornigold, and they wanted Hornigold's ship and his crew, but Gates was supposed to captain that. And then Jack came and talked to him.
And right at first, Gates is having none of it. He's just like, get up and walk away from this table. You sound like you're desperate, he says. But Jack is
under
so smart.
The guise of saying, hey, we're fellow quartermasters, we should rise above everything, he completely undermines Gates's security, his self-assuredness about his ability to captain.
Yeah.
And so that was a pretty awesome Jack moment. That's very,
And let me ask you this, because after that we see Gates go to talk to Flint about changing the captains and about having it be Vane, which of course was Jack's plan all along. Does he seem a little stumbly to you? Is he a little drunk in that scene? He is, right? He carries himself so well once he gets there, but he kind of stumbles up those stairs. It's a very kind of drunken lumber up those stairs. But then when he gets there, he presents his case fairly eloquently for a drunk man. But I still think he might have been just a little bit in his cups. I think that Jack might have tipped the bottle a couple of times for him as he was talking to him about these things.
That's very possible. I did not think about that. I guess I was a little like, that's the first moment we get an actual laugh from Flint.
Yes.
So I think I only really noticed that
moment?
He's actually laughing. And we don't have a lot of those.
And it's a great moment. Yeah.
It's an honest laugh. Like, it's not a laugh that he's doing to like be intimidating or manipulative. Like, he just I think he honestly laughs at. Okay, but we should be focused. Our theme is the quartermasters and captains and their interactions.
Well, yeah, that's what I guess that is. Yeah, their interactions together for sure.
That is part of it.
Well, and I love what Flint says when he's like, if I did consider this, and I am not for a moment going to consider this. And you're like, yeah, but you are, aren't you? Clearly. This is one of those moments where I pretend that we don't both know that you're lying. Yeah. Right,
exactly. Oh, that's true. Right. So we have to talk about how the quartermasters got the captains there. So that was how Gates did it. Rackham's was amazing. How he went and he said, Vane's basically like, gold, whatever. I hate Flint. I don't care about the gold. What is, what's in it for me? And then Rackham does not say Eleanor, but he says, well, think about who else would stand to gain if this whole Urca de Lima thing works out, and how that person might be feeling a little bit differently about you. And it's really
ballsy,
got him to the table.
Because that could totally blow up in his face, especially considering that those two are on the outs right now, and their last interaction, they punched each other in the face. So, I mean, that was a risk.
Oh.
But again, he knows his captain.
But he knows it. We almost said that in unison. He knows his captain. And this is the beauty of this relationship. Like, we had talked about the political side of this relationship. The captains need quartermasters to help them sway the crew. Quartermasters represent the crew, and which the captain needs, because captains can be deposed, because we have this, weird democracy on ships. So we understand their power dynamic. But I love the personal, and that's part of it. Like, these people don't exist just in their roles; they exist as people, and each of these quartermasters they know their captains. They know how to manage them, and I just really feel like that is the right word for what they're doing. They are managing their captains. The captains are who they are,
and it's very reminiscent to me sometimes of a marriage, don't you think?
Yeah. Again, a partnership.
Yeah, it's
another partnership.
Kind of partnership. It absolutely is.
So we have everyone. Well, we have the quartermasters and Eleanor at this table. We have the captains doing their thing, and before we even start, Flint does his first petulant thing, and it's a valid thing. I mean, he's really upset. He is upset that Vane, or Vane's people killed a bunch of members of his crew.
I said Matthias last time. It's Mosiah. So I was almost there, but I missed it. My apologies.
But what I love about this is, he's just really, he is not trying to be conciliatory. No. He's doing everything he can. And I think that's partly a bargaining chip. Partly he is just really mad. He doesn't want this.
Yeah.
He's doing this for Gates. But I just love that moment when Gates takes him out, as you said, to the little walkway. And I just love it because he's like, okay.
My fault?
Maybe I wasn't clear. Right. He does. He says, this is my fault because I wasn't clear about this. And wait, what did he say there? I have to do it. He's like, oh, right. He said, I should have made myself clearer when I said we would have to keep our tempers in check. I should have specified we would have to for the duration of the meeting.
It's really excellent. And Flint is just thoroughly like a teenager the whole time, just arms crossed pouting.
I know.
Yeah.
Right. I just love that. But he completely takes it on himself, at least for the sake of getting Flint, of managing
just getting
Flint.
it through. Yep.
And it's just so funny because it's not even the duration of the meeting is a hilarious thing to say because it's we didn't even start.
Yeah, we hadn't even started. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
And then they come back in, and then they have to go out again. I love it so much. And then you hear that Right. You hear that hilarious comic thing where they're like, you hear them screaming outside, which is just such a silly thing. And yet,
yeah. And it's needed. You're right. It's such a heavy program. Exactly. It's such a heavy show. We need those moments.
Right. Right. And it is. It's just so human. Like, that is a thing you see in comedies because it's a thing that happens. Like, you have those uncomfortable moments where you are hearing someone else screaming, in the other room. I just love it. I just love it. And then, so, like, Jack, I guess, did most of his managing of Vane to get him there, and Gates did most of his managing of Flint once they were already there. Yeah. But it's really... So where we are, this is a theme of just, watching the interplay of quartermasters and captains. That's just going to be super fun and super interesting, and definitely, will show us who these people are and how they end up going the direction that we watch them go, which we're not going to talk about where they go. But so maybe we'll move on now to our next theme, which is the question of who is Mrs. Barlow.
Yep. And again, that's her framing device.
It's really important in this episode.
Well, and you can also see narratively where they space her. It's very important because not only is it a framing device, but at about a quarter of the way through and about 3/4 of the way through, we get her scenes again. So they make sure we don't forget her. Yeah. And that it really is kind of all about this idea of Flint's other life, of this other person that is representative of his domesticity, of some kind of secret about him that we don't understand. And yet, aside from that, this very vibrant human person who is so clearly has her own story and her own stuff going on. So, like, on one hand, she's a plot device, and on the other hand, she is just so, again, vibrant comes to mind. Like, you can't look away from her. She is obviously her own and very strong.
Oh, I love that. Right. That's really interesting. And I love that they put this moment in when Richard Guthrie is talking to her and he says, "Who are you?" And again, 25 minutes into this episode that she was already a kind of big part of. He says, "Who are you?" And she doesn't answer. And he says, oh, no, that's when she says her name, right? She says her name, but then he says the question we're really asking.
Yeah.
And he asks our question. The question because we waited 25 minutes, this is the question that is 100% in our minds at this point. He says, "Who are you to him?"
And we get no answer. We get nothing.
We get no answer. We get a lot of other people's answers. So, like,
clearly she's not a witch that owns his soul, so... Yeah. Right.
So that was Turk's idea. That was what Silver said that Turk had said. So we get a few different perspectives. Like, so we see Richard Guthrie see the portrait. Yes. We hear what Turk said about her, that she's a witch that's controlling Flint. And then we have this kind of haunting scene. Like, we have this very, this scene feels really important when they're on the deck. And we talked already about Billy talking about Singleton. But then we have this moment where Morley says, "Well, you can't trust Flint because you don't know about Mrs. Barlow."
That's all we get.
But it just
what
it's
about
so
Mrs.
ominous.
Barlow? Tell me
exactly. You're like, tell me about Mrs. Barlow. I don't know. I also want to know about Mrs. Barlow.
And then we cut back to her house, and so you think, okay, now we're going to get it. Now they're going to tell us
exactly.
And she's there. She picks up the book and she starts reading about these rocky promontories and about how the waves crash and crash against it, but it is unmoved, and it should be grateful that it is unmoved. And we're cutting back to all these other characters and to Max, who has just said, "No, I am not leaving.
Well,
I lost you your purse, and I will stay until the debt is paid." Absolutely sacrificing herself in this way that is hard to understand as a woman anyway.
Very hard to understand.
As a person, it's easy to understand because she is setting up her own morality. She is setting up her own what loyalty and what justice is.
Accountability.
Yeah. And she's making those rules herself.
Yeah, that's true. Right. I mean, that's true. I mean, it's not exactly, it has a different feeling than the accountability that the pirates were
Right.
demanding of her.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This was,
And I don't even think that she would agree that what they are demanding is right and is just. However,
No.
the idea that she has a debt to pay and that she will not be able to think of herself in the same way until that debt is paid is very indicative of who Max is. Because we've always seen her, like, she is the one that is pushing herself forward. She is trying to make her own identity. Like when she told Eleanor, run away with me. We can have our own life. We can create the people that we want to be. This is one of those moments where she's doing that again, where she's saying, this is who I choose to be. I choose to hold myself accountable for my own actions and to grow and to learn and to change from them, which is really the opposite of what we see from Eleanor in so many times.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So much so. Wow. I love that. You're taking a part of the show that I was very uncomfortable with.
It is uncomfortable because
it's really
we know they're going to take it from her body, but
and brutally.
Yeah.
They're not going to. Right. It's not. This is not like I'm going to wash your dishes for you for a month. This is horrible. I mean, she is consigning herself to a just horrifying and terrifying situation.
That is in no way just. Mm-hmm.
Right. Not at all. Wow. But I do love your idea of where this is coming from in her character. Yeah, I love that. And that's definitely, we're definitely going to have to revisit that when we learn more about her and when we see directions she goes. I really, really like that. Would you mind terribly if I read a little bit of the Marcus Aurelius?
Please do.
I was super focused on this. I have loved this from the very beginning. And I think partly because, this is completely tied to this mystery of Mrs. Barlow. So this is really, I mean, other than the scene where also she's quoting, where she's quoting the book.
She does quote a lot. And this is interesting about her character,
yeah, she
too.
does.
It also makes her unknowable. Right. Because it's a different thing.
She's using other things to reference herself.
And yet when she does it in a way like, open your own eyes and be an individual like I am with this quote that I'm giving you. And you're like, I don't understand her always. And it's part of why I like her, I think. Right.
Yeah. And I love this because I feel like this, it's a great way to end this episode because we saw all this stuff happen. In a large part, this is the type of episode where you're moving parts into place for the action that's going to come, right? Which they managed, I think, to do partly because of the frame of Mrs. Barlow and partly because of other things. They managed to make that also a very interesting episode in itself. Like that it itself has a lot of really great stuff that we're learning about the characters. This piece, I feel like, really goes to dividing the characters between people who are resilient and people who are not resilient. And this, again, goes back to the Gates and Hornigold thing, is that Hornigold is the traditionalist, the person who sees doom. And Gates is trying to be on the other side. He's trying to be on the other side of someone who has vision.
Well, I was going to say, Hornigold also sees that his best days are behind him. And Gates doesn't see that. And certainly Flint doesn't see that. And Vane has already said, if this place has a future, I am it. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, that's totally true. And that ties into this too. Okay, so I'm going to read the bit that she says. I left out a few words, but this is almost the whole thing. It says, "You should be like a rocky promontory against which the restless surf continually pounds." Mm-hmm. So it's really, this is a life philosophy that you could choose. And then this is where we see the different characters. And it says, "I hear you say," and this is where we see Eleanor, "how unlucky that this should happen to me." So this is a person who experiences that way. And then we see Max say instead, "How lucky I am that I am not broken by what has happened." And Max is looking pretty broken right there, but it's...
Yeah, but again, because of that line that we just had from her, we know that she is choosing her own fate in the only way she knows how.
And then we see Silver, and it says, "And I am not afraid of what is about to happen." And then the last piece, we see just her and Richard Guthrie, and it says, "For the same blow might have struck anyone, but not many would have absorbed it without capitulation or complaint. And that's when you see Flint walk in.
And when you see Flint walk in, there is a definite change in atmosphere. Like,
a complete shift.
Like, you know that he looks pissed and she looks guilty. And it's just fascinating. You're like, why? What? So, and just as we're asking that question, and we've just gotten this idea, who is Mrs. Barlow? We're waiting for the answer. And Flint literally closes the door. It's fascinating. It's great storytelling. It's so good.
I know. It is so good. It really is. It's just, it's a great close. It's just, and it ties everything together. We have Mrs. Barlow in her books. We have, everything that happened to everyone in this episode. And this one bit of reading, which is really, what we know about her. We know she loves books. This one bit of reading really kind of brings it all together into this kind of nice little package. But also a package that's a little scary, because Flint is really scary right there. Like, we've seen him in a lot. We've seen him do a lot of things emotionally in this episode. We've seen him laugh.
Yeah,
again,
that's right.
This is a special thing. We've seen him laugh. We've seen him do a lot of things, but that's scary Flint.
Yeah.
We get a little bit of scary Flint at the end.
Barlow be so strong, and again, be the one who's schooling all these guys. And then in this particular situation, she feels humbled and possibly a little intimidated. Certainly.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I would be. I don't know. It's hard to really put myself in her shoes. She definitely is already in a place that's very different than one that I would choose for my life. As much as I love Flint,
right? Yeah.
But yeah, so I just love that. I just thought it was so beautiful, and I really do. I like this idea of tracking people who are resilient and flexible. Or not flexible, I guess, Rocky Parentarius now, but people who are resilient, people who weather blows and look forward to the future, versus people who are very concerned with how the world is keeping them back and how the world is, imposing itself on them. And I think that's really going to be very telling about our characters.
All right. So, Daphne, we've dived as deep as we can in this thing. So you tell me, what's your favorite part of this episode?
Okay, so this is actually my favorite thing of the first 3 episodes, because we didn't really talk about favorite things in this way up until now.
Thank you, Kate, for the idea.
But I just have to say, yes, thank you, Kate. This is what we're doing at the end of each episode. So I just have to say the belts.
The belts.
I love the belts. I am crazy. I am crazy for the Black Sails belts. They are all so spectacular, men and women, men in particular. But
the scene when Gates goes up to talk to Flint right before Flint laughs, it's like distracting. The belt is distractingly awesome. Not that I'm complaining.
I know.
Complaints.
And Billy's belt.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And I mean, Vane's belt is like,
a corset.
Almost a corset. It's so big.
Say the same thing.
I'm just sorry. I do love belts very, very much. And these belts are spectacular, not just because they're big, but because they're big and they're just really texture. Like, they just have great texture and great buckles, and
they fit their characters so well. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. And really, I just honestly want them all. So that's my totally frivolous favorite thing. I promise in other episodes to have more substantive, or maybe I don't promise. I don't know. Sometimes I'll have more substantive. But I do. I love those belts. I love those belts like crazy. Okay, what is your favorite thing?
Since you were a little bit frivolous, I will be too. My favorite thing, and it's a total girl answer, and you know what? I'm a girl, so I accept that, is when Vane goes to shake Eleanor's hand, and then he does a little lingering finger touch thing. Every time I'm just like, oof, okay, unfair. Unfair, Charles Vane. How dare you?
I don't think you're alone there. I think that moment probably resonates with a lot of women.
Great. It's really good. He's excellent in that whole scene, as I said. And I'm more like, if I had to pick a character to have a crush on, it wouldn't be Charles Vane, but that scene is amazing. And he made it look easy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's great.
I know, we should start saying like a Black Sales podcast / really just we love Zach McGowan. We love everyone.
We do.
Love
I was
all
going
of
to say, I
y'all,
can't leave
but
Toby Stevens out, though. I can't. Yeah.
No. I love Toby Stevens. I love all of them so much.
No,
but yeah, I feel like
I can't. Yeah.
I know. We have talked a lot. We'll give everyone their
Don't
love.
you worry.
We have talked a lot
They
about
all
Zach McGowan, and he
earn it.
has deserved every moment of it.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fun, as always. I'm super looking forward to next week with you, Daphne.
Me too.
And until next time, I'm Liz Stevens.
I'm Daphne Olive.
Fathoms Deep is a Common Room radio production. For more information and access to other programs, please visit us at commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can be made to patreon.com/commonroomradio. Join the conversation by using the hashtag #Fathoms Deep and follow us on Twitter at Black Salescast. We ask that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and please avoid spoilers. If you have more to say, we want to hear it in all its spoiler glory. Email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com with Fathoms Deep in the subject line. Thanks for listening.